my wife was asking me this recently. She's like, "Why are you so different? Like, why you're?" She's like, "You're an interesting creature." Um, I would say I was very inquisitive at a very young age. I was
Mhm.
I remember going to church, but then journaling about meditation and fasting, even though they weren't talking about that. There was these ideas of like of what is the spirit and what does this actually mean, and then being engaged in conversations that w- I would try to engage people in those conversations, and I didn't get back what I was looking for. So I had a lot of inquiry at a young age. I'd say the self awareness. I would say that there's a lot of deep inquiry, and I recognize that I felt like I was different than other people in some ways that most people aren't experiencing. And that's not like a brag or anything. It's just like I don't I don't quite fit in here. And part of that's, probably being homeschooled. But um I actually wanted to fit in, and I suppressed that a bit when I went in the Navy. And then when I was in the Navy, that suppression really couldn't hold me very well. And so I knew I was going to get out. But there was an experience that I had in 2013 that allowed me to, I would say that was like an awakening of sorts. There's been multiple awakenings throughout my life. A lot of times people have one awakening and they call it the awakening. And
Mhm.
if you keep going, there's going to be more, I promise. And I I I had a lot of self-awareness in one respect, but I didn't see necessarily, I felt disconnected from the world until about 2013. And in 2013, I went to a business conference because I wanted to learn how to make money online. And I had done a good job with my gyms, but I had this big YouTube following and I wasn't making any money from it. And so I went to this conference, and at this conference there was a lot of personal development work being done there. Like day one, the bonus day was like learning how to learn. I go, all right, that sounds interesting. I'll show up to that.
Yeah.
And got a lot out of it. And then, but throughout that week, I started getting some. There was an exercise on empathy that really hit me, and I uh, I was at this conference for 7 days, and at the end of the 7 days, like in the middle of the conference, I got this intuitive hit of like, go eat some psychedelic mushrooms. And I it wasn't it was it was kind of out of the blue because up until that point the only safe drug that I was familiar with was alcohol,
Mhm.
and and maybe I smoked a little bit of weed, but I felt, I was like, I don't do drugs. And so I was pretty straight laced in that way. But I got the hit to eat some mushrooms, and so I get home and I was able to track down some mushrooms, and then a couple days after the conference, I did a really good job of setting up a really intentional space for myself, which most people don't do their first time. As I was divinely held and led. I look back at that first time and I was like, oh, I did a lot of things right. When I talked to other people when the first time they did mushrooms and they didn't have any guidance, they did it did a really poor job of setting the scene. And in that experience, I I learned two things. One is, without going into like a trip report, but the two big things I got out of the experience was, oh, everything that I'm experiencing in my world, I'm it's an interpretation, and I am creating everything. Like I am very powerful in my ability to create my reality. And so it was a very empowering moment where I gained a level of ownership of reality that probably had been explained to me in books I had been reading up until that point, or I had heard people talk about it, but I had a visceral experience of it in the psychedelic journey. And then I also connected to empathy for the first time in my life and
Mm.
really learned like, oh, I'm not listening to other people. I was assuming that if anyone disagreed with me, they were stupid. And I was able to expand the way I was interpreting the world and become very curious about other people's experiences. And that was a really pivotal moment that really kicked off when I tell people, tell them I've been in personal development for 12 years since 2013, and I can point at that was the moment where I had a really profound aha. I'd been doing things differently. I definitely thought differently than most people up to that point. But that was the part where I go, oh, I am the creator of my reality, and there are other creators of their reality, and I get to be curious about them and actually get to experience some level of intimacy and connection with people. And that really was the first time that was a rabbit hole. And that's when I started questioning things. That's when I go, oh, they lied to me about the mushrooms. So what else, what else is there that is a mainstream narrative that is inaccurate? And so I kept digging around, digging around, digging around. And it wasn't so much like mainstream narratives that I found. It was more of my own personal narratives that was questioning and realizing that, wow, I was wrong about this and that. What else have I been wrong about? And so really started digging. And from there, I started engaging with work, which I thought previously was silly. I thought the idea of doing emotional development was silly, or talking about, things that happened in my childhood were silly, or, um, you know, experiencing and showing emotions were silly, or weak. And I, I, I got really curious. I left
Yeah.
where I was living to surround myself with other people who were having other experiences. I went to Burning Man. I signed up for leadership development programs. I went down to South America to drink ayahuasca. Um, I engaged with coaches, and I really went hard in the paint. Went to meditation retreats, all while running a business successfully. And so it was, every time I was having some type of breakthrough for myself, I was getting a better read on how the world operates and how just humans in general, how we all develop, and what does that mean culturally, and how is the culture developing, and how are these
Mhm.
things the same and how are they different? So
Yeah.
that that was like the moment that triggered this avalanche of curiosity.